We're on Daf Tesvav Amid Beis. Let's just review the top of the Amud that we did yesterday. Bimei Rabbi Chalafta in Tzipori, Rabbi Chananya ben Trajan in Sichli, Sha'over Echad Lufnei HaTeva. He was the Shliach Tzibur in Taanit with Gomer Es HaBrocha Kula. He finished the Bracha of Gal Yisrael with the additional Tosefes that they added for Taanit. And the Tzibur Lo Anu Achrav Amen. Instead of responding Amen, they responded Baruch Shein Kvod Malchus Soli Olam Voed, which is only appropriate for the Mikdash. And Li'achmi kind of afterwards, the Shamash said Tiku, Kohanim Tiku, and then the Shamash added a declaration: Micha Ones Avram Avinu Bar Moria Hu Ya'aneh Eschem B'Shama V'Yishma B'Kol Kaschem Hayom Hazeh. And then the Kohanim would blow a tekiah, a trua, and a tekiah again. So it was a trua with a tekiah l'faneh and a tekiah l'achrel. The Ritva adds that when he declared tiku, they prepared themselves for the tekiah. And in the meantime, while they were preparing themselves, then he would recite Micha Ana, and then they would blow. Now, after the Shliach Tzibur completed this entire process, apparently the word got back to the Chacham. Uksheba Dover Eitzel Chachamim, and they heard this minhag of Rabbi Chalafta and Rabbi Chananya. They didn't approve. Amru lo hayinu nogim came. We would not institute a custom of responding Baruch Shein Kvod Malchus Olam Voed instead of Amen. Ella b'shar hamizrach ubahar habayis. Only at the time the Mikdash stood, when they would daven in the Har Habayis, they would enter into the Har Habayis through a shar called the Shar HaMizrach. But we don't respond Amen in the Mikdash. We only respond Baruch Shein Kvod Malchus Olam Voed. So in the first bracha, they begin with tekiah first, and therefore it was announced tiku. In the second bracha, they began with trua. And this is going to be based on Rashi later on in Daf Tes Zayin. And the Gvuras Ari is wondering about this. Why in tiku he would say Kohen, and in Hariu he would say Bnei Aaron. What's the difference between the two? In any event, the Kohanim that served in the Beis HaMikdash were divided into 24 mishmaros, and every week there was one mishmar that was in charge of the avoda. The mishmar itself was subdivided into 7 batei avos, and each Beis Av would serve in the Mikdash one day out of that week. And now the Mishnah is going to teach us, with regard to Anshe Mishmar and Anshe Beis Av, what are the leniencies with regard to Taanit, because since they're so busy with the tircha, with the preoccupation of the avoda, Taanit is not going to make life easier for them. Shalosh Taanios Rishonos Anshe Mishmar Misanim Velo Mashlim. Now, you might say the following. We start with a leniency for the Anshe Mishmar. Why should we be lenient if the Anshe Mishmar are not in charge of the Avod, it's only the Anshe Beis Av? And why are we allowing them to fast, but then to break their fast before nightfall, before the end and the completion of the fast? And the reason for this is because if the work of the Karbanos, which is incumbent upon the Anshe Beis Av, who are in charge of the service on Yom HaTaanis, if it gets too heavy for them, then as a fallback position, the cavalry in the back would be the Anshe Mishmar. They would have to come and help them. And if they were fasting, they would not have enough strength to help them in the avodah. So in a sense, they're on what you might call the Ondeck Circle, in event that the Anshe Beis Av will not be able to complete the avodah, they would be called, the Anshe Mishmar would be called upon to help. The Anshe Beis Av, here we could be makil with the first three tainios for the Anshe Beis Av, lo yimas anim klal, because of the responsibility, the heavy work on their shoulders. Therefore, they didn't fast at all. Now, the truth is that most of the avodos were complete by the time the Talmud Shel Ben Arbayim was brought. So, what good does it do to tell me that in the case of the Anshe Mishpah, they weren't mashlim the Taanit? Okay, so we'll see that there's certain avodos that took place even later. Now we get to the more severe chamuros of the second set of shalosh tainios. And this means that after the first three tainios, there was no gshamim, and Bezdin now decrees another set of three tainios. These tainios begin at night. They're more chamur, they're asib malacha, and in the 5 inuyim. So now we're going to jack up the chumrah for the Anshe Mishmar and the Anshe Beis Av one notch. Anshe Mishmar is anin umashlimin. It means they have to fast the entire day until nightfall, because they were not in charge of the actual, they didn't have the duty of the actual avodah. Anshe Beis Av is anin velo mashlimin. They would begin fasting, and they wouldn't have to complete the fast. Now we get, as for shalom, if the second set of tainios was not responded to on high, we get to the third set, which is 7 tainios. These are the most chamur. And then elu v'elu mitzanin umachlimin dim Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion that now both the Anshe Mishmar and the Anshe Beis Av have to fast the entire fast. However, the Chachamim disagree. Omrim, they say, Sholosh Tanis Rishonos Elu v'elu mahayim b'sanim klal. Even the Anshe Mishmar would not fast at all. In contrast to Rabbi Yeshua's shita, that in the first 3 tainios, the Anshe Mishmar would fast but not be matched. According to the Chachamim, they wouldn't fast at all. They wouldn't even begin to fast. Shalosh Shnios, in the second round of 3 fast days, where we said that according to Rabbi Yeshua, the Anshe Mishmar should complete the fast. Here, according to Chacham, Anshe Mishmar is anim v'lo mishal. They begin the fast and don't complete it. Anshe Beis Av, which we saw according to Rabbi Yeshua, would be mis'ana but lo mashlim. According to Chacham, lo yemasanim klal. So we see that the Chachama make it both in the first 3 tainios and in the second. What about the third set, where Rabbi Yeshua argued elu v'elu mis'anim mashlimim? Sheva achronos Anshe Mishmar mis'anim mashlimim, Anshe Beis Av mis'anim v'lo mashlimim. So the kula here, according to Chachamim, in the case of the last 7 tainios, is with regard to the Anshe Beis Av, and they would fast but not be mashlim. And once we're mentioning the halachas that are relevant to the Anshe Mishmar, the Anshe Beis Av on a tainus, the Mishnah goes on and adds other halachas that are relevant to this during the course of the entire year. Anshe Mishmar, who are working in the Mikdash, utarim lishtos yayin alelos. Since these are only the Anshe Mishmar, not the Anshe Beis Av, so they're only going to work in the Mikdash in event that the Anshe Beis Av can't do the job their own. So right now, we could say that the Anshe Mishmar, are not involved in the avodah. Therefore, they are allowed to drink wine at night during the entire week of the avodah in the Mikdash, because they're not being makriv the korbanos, and certainly not at night. And we're not afraid that the workload of the Beis Av will be so severe and they won't be able to live up to all their responsibilities that we'll have to call upon the Anshe Mishmar to fill in for them. And again, we're talking about Balaylos, so they saw already by the time night came around that the avoda on the shoulders of the Anshe Beis Av were not so heavy. Avalo b'yomim. We don't know what's going to be during the day, and it could very well be that the Anshe Beis Av will tire out, and the Anshe Mishmar will have to be called upon, take them out of the bullpen, as we said before, to help and assist the Anshe Beis Av, and therefore we're not going to allow the Anshe Mishmar to drink yayin during the day, because then they could not be part of the avoda in the event that we will lead them in the avoda. The Anshe Beis Av lo bayom v'lo b'layla. The Anshe Beis Av are enjoined from drinking wine even at night, because even at night they are involved to some extent in the avoda, and that's called Mailim Kol Laila Eivarim Upidarim. That even though we don't bring karbanos at night, but yet Eivarim and Pidarim, which were put on the mizbeach, let's say during the day, but they weren't fully consumed, and they were taken off the mizbeach. Now they have to be put back on the mizbeach, and that's the responsibility, obviously, of the Anshe Beis Av. Or, for example, in another scenario, if let's say they weren't able to complete all the olos and aktaros of all the Eivarim P'darim during the course of the day, they could complete that at night. Additionally, they do what's called haficha b'mazleg. If let's say the Eivarim on the Eish are not getting fully burned, you have to turn them over upside down. That also has the status of an avoda, and the Anshe Beis Av have to be prepared for that, and that could take place even at night. So there's no drinking of wine for the Anshe Beis Av. Anshe Mishmar, and the Anshe Mishmar, we said, they get their week, in which out of the weeks of the year, they have 1 week specified where they do the avodah. The Anshe Mamad, those are the individuals who stand at the time of the Hakaras HaKarban on behalf of the Tzibur, and them mispalin. Their tefillas are that the carbon of their brothers should be accepted b'rotzon. Asur mi'lesaper, both the Anshe Mishmar and the Anshe Maimed are enjoined from taking haircuts, u'milchabes, from washing their begadim during that week that's designated for their avoda, u'bechamishi, on Thursday of that week of their mishmeres, utarim, they're allowed to take a haircut, they're allowed to launder their clothes, mipnei kvod hashabbos. It's already Thursday. Friday is going to be a very taxing, pressured day. We're going to allow them already on Thursday to take a haircut and to wash their clothes. We're now going to discuss Megillah's Taanit, which is a document, a Megillah, that was written when the Bayis still stood, and it would enumerate those days which the Chachamim determined were Miktzas Yontif because of different great events that took place, miracles that took place, and those days was Asur B'Taanit because of those miracles that took place during the Bayis, in this case Bayis Sheni. And Nizkru Ba Yom Nosafim. There were even days that were even greater, meaning that there were bigger miracles. And the Rabbanim were even more machmer on those days. And in addition to being prohibited and enjoined from Taanit, they were enjoined also from Hesped. And now a Mishnah brings a debate about Iser Hesped v'Taanit on the day before that calendar date of Megillah's Taanit and the date afterwards. Kol HaKosav Megillah's Taanit, the low lemispad those very great holidays, which are prohibited not only in Taanit, but also in Hesped, is Shalafanav us, even the day before is prohibited as far as Taanit and Hesped, because we're afraid that Shema Yavo Lasus Kain Af Biyontiv Atzma. If we don't prohibit the day before, they may come to do a Taanit or a Hesped even on that day, which is a Mixas Yontiv, as we say. However, Liachrav Mutter, according to this Tanakama, the day after the Yontif is Mutter. The Chacham are not Choshesh that perhaps he will be Noeg on Yontif itself with Taanit and Hesped if you allow him to do it on the day afterwards. That's according to the Chacham. However, Rabbi Yossi Cholek, he disagrees. The Omer, he's of the opinion, Shalafonov, B'Shaliachrav Os. They went as far as prohibiting the Easter of, extending the Easter of Taanit and Hesped even to the day after the calendar date that was celebrated. Now, during those days in Megillus Taanit that aren't so severe, and therefore there's only an Easter Taanit without an Easter Hesped, below lehis anah, you're not allowed to fast, lefonov, uliachrav mut. On the day before, you're not allowed to fast, but on the day afterwards, you're allowed to fast. Rabbi Yossi Omer, lefonov asur, and shaliachrav mutter. Rabbi Yossi says on the day before it's asur, but on the day afterwards, it's mutter. Whereas the Tanakhama says on those less severe days that are only also the Taanit, it's mutter before the day, both with regard to Taanit, lefonov and liachar, both the day before and the day after. Rabbi Yossi says lefonov is also. Ein godrin Taanit ala tzibur betchila b'chamish. When the Rabbanan enact a Taanit, they don't begin with a Taanit on a Thursday. Why not? This has to do with finances, with defending and protecting the financial interests of the Jewish people. And that is Kadesh lo lafkias hasha'orim. What happens is that the sellers of food, when they see that so many of the stores are buying on the day after that Thursday, 2 sudos gedolos, one to break the fast and one in honor of Shabbos, they begin to think that maybe there's a famine in the world and a big shortage of food. They start jacking up their prices. But if when Bezdin makes the Gzera of the Taanit, they start with a Monday, then they go to Thursday and Monday, then there's no problem. We're not afraid of Hafkos HaShi'orim. Because in that case, the Bali Chanuyo, the Mochrei Mazon, already see that this is part of a set of Taanios. So that's, as far as the first day of the set of Taanios, we have to exclude Thursday. And Shalosh Shnios in the second set of Taanios, Chamishi, Sheni, v'Chamishi. Then it's okay, we can start on a Thursday. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Omer, Shem She'eno Rishonos v'Chamishi, Kach lo Shnios v'Achronos. We will never start any set of Taanios, whether it's the first, second, or third, on a Thursday. He's always worried about Hafkos Shi'orim. Maybe the sellers won't get the message that this is part of a system of Taanios. The Mishnah continues, Ein goes in Taanit al Tibur B'Rosh Chodesh B'Chanukah B'Purim. We do not establish neither Rosh Chodesh, it's called a Moed, nor Chanukah Purim, which are Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha, as a Taanit Tzibur. Meschilu, but if Beis Din made such a decree, and they set up the Seder Taanios of the Tzibur for the lack of rain or any other tzara, and they didn't pay any attention that the way they organized the set and the sequence of Taanios, it's going to clash with Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah Purim, and the people began already to fast one of these fast days of that series, then Ein Mafsikin Divrei Rav Gamliel. Rav Gamliel says, in such a case, if there's a clash between the Taanit that Beis Din had decreed and these days of Rosh Chodesh Chanukah Purim, we will fast. Rabbi Meir, Afal Pisham Rav Gamliel Ein Mafsikin Modeh Hoya She'ein Mashlimin. You should know, says Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Gamliel didn't mean that you could fast the entire day of Rosh Chodesh Chanukah Purim. He meant that you're allowed to fast, but you can't be mashlim, which means you'd have to break your fast sometime before Shkia Sachama. I don't know exactly how many minutes before Shkia Sachama, but enough to make sure that Rosh Chodesh and its sanctity has been observed. V'chein Tisha B'Av shechalios b'erev Shabbos. We did not complete a fast going into Shabbos, meaning if Friday turns out to be Tisha B'Av, and being mashal in the Taanit would mean that going into Shabbos you're still fasting. That we're not going to allow. We're going to ask you to break your Taanit before nightfall. The Gemara says, Seder Taanios Ketzad. I mean, quoting the Mishnah, of course, Motziin es HaTevel Rechovot Shel Ir. And from the Mishnah, it seems that Seder Taanios Ketzad, this was the minhag on all Seder Taanios, not only Rishonos, but also the Shnios, and so forth. So the Gemara asks a stira of Afilu B'Kamaisel. Is this the Seder Taanios even for the first set of three Taanios, meaning we take the Teva out of the Beis HaKnesses, out into the Rechovot Shel Ir, even on the three first Taanios, which are the most lenient Taanios or Minu? I'll ask you a stira from a brisa, Sholosh Taanit Rishonos Ushnios Nichnos Beis HaKnesses, Umispalim Kederech Shemispalim Kol Hashana Kula. We do not take the teva out into the public, and only when we get to Sheva Taanios Achronos Motziin es HaTeva, we take the Aron Kodesh with the Sefer Torah out the Rechovot Shel Ir. V'nosnin Efer, we put either dirt from the ground or ashes after burning something, al gabi teva, on top of the teva. Uberosh hanasi, on top of the head of the nasi. Uberosh av Beis Din. We call echad the echad me'atzibur notel efer v'nosein berosh. So this is the opinion of the Tanakam. So we can allow either for afar or efer. Rabbi Nosson Omer efer mikla hein mevin. It's got to be exclusively afer that was burnt ashes that came from burning. And that's going to remind HaKadosh Baruch Hu, remind us also the afer shel Yitzchak. So it should be a zecher for the afro shel Yitzchak. We see clearly from this price that only in the last 7 Taanios were they noeg to take the teva and bring it out to the Rechovot Shel Ir. Our Mishnah seems to imply that even in the first set of Taanios, they took the teva out into the Rechovot Shel Ir. And the Gemara answers on Rav Papa, Ki Tanan Nami Masnisin Hasheva Achronos Tanan. Our Mishnah that mentions the Seder Taanios and the obligation to take the teva out into the public area, that's only referring to the last and most severe set of Taanios, the last 7 Taanios. The Mishnah says that we put this afer on top of the teva and on top of the head of the nasi and the head of the Abbez. So the Gemara now is going to ask a question on this seder of Nesinas Efer. Why do we begin with the Nasi, and then we go to the Abezdin, and only in the end of this whole process, then do we put it on the heads of the Am, the people of the nation. Tani. Other Tani, we have another brisa called Echad v'Echad Nosein Barosha. Every person put Efer Makla on his own head. So the Gemara asks, Eini, are you implying in this brisa that the first in the sequence is to put the Efer on human, when I say human, I mean heads of or leaders of the people, and only afterwards we put it on the rank and file citizen? But Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rebbe Omer B'Gedula, when we talk about a mitzvah and there's no perennials involved, Maschilim and Agadol, we begin with the most important person, the teacher, the leader. Ubeklolam, but when we talk about perennials, Maschilim and Akatan, we're going to begin with the lower person. And the source for this is with regard to the period right after the death of another Vaviv Vayikra Yud, Vayomer Moshe Aaron Ulazar Uli Tamar, Bana Frashechem Al Tifro Vigdeim Lo Tifromu. So the mitzvah was given to them in a certain specific sequence. Lefi Seder Chashivusa. First Aaron, then Elazar, and then finally Itamar. So we see that we start with a gadol. Ubeklola maschilin bin akatan. When it comes to something that's perennials, meaning in the aftermath of the cardinal sin, this first sin, the sin of Adam Arishon, Chava and the Nachash, the Eitz Hadas, is betchila niskal ha-Nachash. First in punishments in Klola, the Nachash suffered his Klola. Achikach then niskal Chava. Then Arbe etzvonech v'haronech v'etzev tel bibanim Chaviachach niskal Adam. Going in descending order until we get to Adam Arishon, Arura Adama Bavurech, and Bitzavon Tochleno Kol Yimei Chayech. So we see that when it comes to perennials, punishments, and klola, we begin with the katan. So why, in the case of the sinas efer, which is perennials, why to begin from the gadol, meaning the nasi or the abezdin, and only afterwards we get the shara'am? So the Gemara answers that nesinas ha'efer rosham tefillah, that has nothing to do with perennials. Hachashivuso l'didu, ti'amr lehu aton chashivuso l'miboya lon rachne akuli alm. What we're indicating in this sequence, putting Efer on the heads of these various important people, is we're telling them you're so important that your tefillos and your petitions will be more powerful than the rank and file citizen. And since the Sinas Efer has this dimension of kavod ugdula, therefore we begin with the gadol. The Mishnah says, "Kol echad v'echad notel or nosein barosha." Amar Rav Ada, a lot of girsa issues here. Kol echad v'echad nosein barosha. So the Gemara asks Nasi, let the Nasi and the Abezdin take the Efer, put it on their heads, just like everyone else puts it on his head. Maishno, why is the Nasi and the Abezdin different? It's Shakil, Inish, Achrina, Umenachlu. That somebody else will put the Efer on their heads. Clearly, with regard to the Amcha, so to speak, the rank and file citizen, everyone's going to put their own Efer Machal on the head. Why not apply that same yardstick to the Av Bez, the Nasi and the Av Bez? Rabbi Abba, the Min Kisrei came from Kisrei. Eina Dome, Mishan is Misbayesh Me Atzmo. The level of humiliation in a case of someone who takes the Efer Makal and puts it on his head, that's called Misbayesh Mi Atzmo. Here we're going to look on Tes Zayin. L'misbayesh Machirim. It's a much more profound busha in Agmas Nefesh when somebody else puts the Efer Makal on your hand, your head. And in the cases of the Nasi and the Abezdin, because of their chashivus, their boshes is very, very profound when somebody else puts the Efer on top of their heads. But with regard to the Amon Am, your rank and file citizen who's not so chashiv, they don't have more Agmas Nefesh from the fact that someone puts the Efer Mikla on their head. It's enough that they put the Efer on. They do their own job. The Heicha Monachle asks the Gemara, where do you put on the head? Where do you put down the Efer? Rabbi Yitzchak Mokom Anochas Tefillin, the place where the Tefillin Shel Rosh sits. Shenemar, how do I derive this? From Pasuk in Yeshaya. Lasum liavele Tzion laseslem pe'er tachas Efer. Tefillin Shel Rosh are called Pe'er, and that's a pasuk in Yechezkel, Pe'ercha Chavo Shalem. And the pasuk in Yeshaya clarifies that Meinichem es ha'efer bizman avelus v'tzar b'mokom anochas Tefillin Shel Rosh shenikroim Pe'er. They will place the efer whenever the avelus of the tzar requires it, in the Mokom Anochas Tefillin Shel Rosh, it's called Pe'er. Okay, then the hour is late, and this is where we're going to stop. Thank you very much, and have a great week.